Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1902 in the dense, mice-shrouded valleys of the Ozark Mountains. Most folks in Shannon County, Missouri still lived much as their ancestors had, isolated, self-sufficient, and deeply suspicious of outsiders. It was in these remote hills that the Carver brothers made their home, a weathered two-story farmhouse set back from Jack's Fork River, about 15 miles from the nearest town of Eminence. The house stood half-hidden among ancient oaks and hickories, its windows like watchful eyes peering out at travelers who occasionally passed along the nearby dirt road. The Carver brothers, Elijah the elder at 42 and Silas 39, had inherited the property from their father some 10 years prior. They were known in Eminence as capable hunters and trappers who appeared in town only when necessary to trade pelts and purchase supplies they couldn't produce themselves. What few travelers encountered them on their land described them as civil but taciturn men who clearly preferred their isolation. What makes this case so disturbing isn't the nature of the brothers themselves, but what was discovered in the spring of 1903 when a land surveyor named Thomas Blackwood ventured onto their property only to find the farmhouse apparently abandoned. No livestock in the pens, no smoke from the chimney, just stillness and silence. According to Blackwood's written account, preserved in the Shannon County Historical Society archives, he approached the house cautiously, calling out several times. Receiving no response, he pushed open the front door, which swung inward with a prolonged creak. The interior was neat, but appeared frozen in time, as if the inhabitants had simply vanished in the middle of their daily activities. A half-written letter sat on a desk in the parlor. Two dinner plates with the remains of a meal sat on the kitchen table along with two half-empty cups of what appeared to be coffee. But what struck Blackwood most profoundly was the silence. "I have never experienced such a profound absence of sound," he wrote in his journal. Even the constant bird song and insect drone of the Ozarks seemed to die at the threshold of that house. What Blackwood discovered in the cellar of that house would become the foundation of one of the most disturbing legends in Ozark history. A story that locals would speak of only in hushed tones for generations to come. The Carver brothers had lived together in their isolated homestead for nearly a decade after their father's passing. According to the sparse records available from the Eminence General Store, they made regular monthly trips to trade and purchase supplies. Peculiar men, but respectable, noted the store's ledger alongside their accounts. Always pay in full, never cause trouble. But behind this mundane facade of rural life, something far darker was brewing. The brothers had inherited not just land and property from their father, Jeremiah Carver, but a legacy that stretched back to the earliest settlers of the region. Jeremiah had been a respected trapper and guide, one who knew the Ozark wilderness better than most. His wife Sarah had died giving birth to their third son, who himself survived only a few hours. This loss seemed to transform Jeremiah. According to accounts from older residents collected by local historian Mabel Henson in 1958, Old Man Carver was never the same after Sarah passed, recalled one elderly resident, who would have been a young man when Jeremiah was still alive. He took to spending weeks alone in the deepest hollers, coming back with more pelts than seemed possible. Some said he knew places in those mountains no white man had set foot in before. The Carver homestead sat at the confluence of two small streams that fed into Jack's Fork River. The location was surprisingly fertile for the typically rocky Ozark soil, allowing the family to maintain modest crops alongside their hunting and trapping. The house itself had been built in the 1870s, replacing an earlier log cabin constructed by Jeremiah when he first claimed the land in 1851. 2 stories tall with a stone foundation and cellar. The house was solidly constructed of local oak and pine with a broad front porch facing south toward the river. By all accounts, Elijah and Silas maintained the property well. The fields were tended, the house kept in good repair, the outbuildings functional. Nothing in their external circumstances suggested the horror that would later be discovered. Yet those who traded with them in eminence occasionally noted a peculiar intensity in their manner, particularly in the elder brother Elijah. He'd look at you like he was trying to memorize every detail of your face, recalled Hannah Morton, whose father ran the mercantile in eminence from 1895 to 1908. Not threatening exactly, but there was something unsettling about his gaze, like he was looking for something specific in your features. The brothers rarely socialized. They attended no church, joined no community gatherings, sought no wives. Their isolation might have seemed unusual elsewhere, but in the scattered communities of the rural Ozarks, such reclusiveness was not unheard of. Families often lived miles apart, connected only by infrequent visits and the occasional shared labor of barn raisings or harvests. The Carvers participated in none of these communal activities, yet their absence raised few eyebrows. Some folks just prefer their own company, was the general sentiment, according to interviews conducted decades later. This tolerance for isolation would later haunt the community as they questioned whether they might have noticed something amiss had they paid closer attention. The events that would transform the Carver name into a whispered warning began with a seemingly ordinary occurrence. The brothers failed to make their monthly trip to Eminence in late February of 1903. At first, this absence caused little concern. Winter in the Ozarks could be harsh with snow and ice making travel difficult, and it wasn't unusual for the more remote homesteaders to stock up and remain on their property until spring thaw made roads passable again. When March passed without a visit from the Carvers, still few in Eminence gave it much thought. It was only in April, when Thomas Blackwood's surveying work brought him to the edge of the Carver property, that anyone realized something might be amiss. Blackwood's discovery in the cellar would set in motion a chain of investigations that would uncover generations of dark secrets hidden in the isolated valleys of Shannon County. Secrets that many locals would later insist should have remained buried. As spring settled over the Ozarks in 1903, the disappearance of the Carver brothers might have remained just another mystery of the mountains, lost among the countless stories of people who ventured into the wilderness, never to return. But Thomas Blackwood's discoveries in that silent house ensured their story would never be forgotten. Upon finding the abandoned farmhouse, Blackwood did what any responsible citizen would. He made his way back to Eminence to report his findings to Sheriff James Holloway. According to Holloway's official report filed April 12, 1903, he assembled a small party of men to accompany him to the Carver property the following day. "We approached the house around midday," Holloway wrote. "Everything appeared just as Blackwood had described. The property showed no signs of violence or struggle, merely abandonment. The livestock pens were empty, though whether the animals had been sold, slaughtered, or simply released was impossible to determine. The sheriff's party conducted a thorough search of the main house, finding nothing immediately alarming beyond the sense of sudden departure. It was only when they descended into the cellar that the true nature of the Carver brothers' activities began to reveal itself. The cellar itself was larger than typical for Ozark farmhouses of the period. Holloway noted it extended beyond the footprint of the house above, suggesting it had been expanded at some point. The space was divided into several rooms by rough stone walls. The first contained ordinary stores, preserved foods, tools, and other household necessities. It was in the second chamber, accessible through a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands, that they made their first disturbing discovery. The room contained a large table of thick oak, its surface stained dark. Around it stood several chairs, along with shelves lined with glass jars containing various substances that none in the sheriff's party could immediately identify. A leather-bound journal sat open on the table, its pages covered in a cramped, meticulous handwriting. Sheriff Holloway confiscated the journal, noting in his report that it appeared to document experiments of some nature written in such technical language as to be largely incomprehensible to the layman. The journal would later be sent to researchers at the University of Missouri, though its contents have never been fully disclosed to the public. The third chamber reached through a narrower passage carved directly into the limestone bedrock beneath the property, contained what Holloway described only as evidence of activities inconsistent with the normal practices of farming or trapping. His reluctance to elaborate in an official report speaks volumes about what the search party encountered. One member of that party, Franklin Reed, was less reticent in a private letter written to his brother in St. Louis, dated April 20, 1903. This letter, discovered among family papers donated to the Missouri Historical Society in 1952, provides one of the few first-hand accounts of what was found in that third chamber. "I write this only for your eyes, brother, as I would not wish to distress Caroline or the children with such accounts," Reed began. "What we found in that lowest room beneath the Carver house defies rational explanation. The walls were covered with drawings and symbols unlike anything I have ever seen, rendered in what appeared to be a mixture of charcoal and some reddish substance I dare not speculate upon." Reed described a circular depression in the center of the floor, surrounded by arrangements of stones bearing markings similar to those on the walls. Most disturbing, he noted, were collections of personal effects, watches, rings, spectacles, and other such items arranged with meticulous precision on shelves carved into the rock walls. Sheriff Holloway ordered the cellar sealed following their investigation. According to his report, he posted notices in Eminence and surrounding communities requesting information about the whereabouts of Elijah and Silas Carver, but no credible sightings were ever reported. The mystery of what exactly transpired at the Carver homestead might have remained just that, a mystery, had it not been for the discovery of additional documents in 1927, when the property was finally sold by the county after years of tax delinquency. The new owners, the Peterson family, discovered a cache of papers hidden in a compartment beneath the floorboards of the main bedroom. These documents included correspondence between Elijah Carver and various individuals across the country, as well as what appeared to be journal entries predating those found in the cellar. These papers eventually made their way to Dr. Martin Graber, a folklorist documenting Ozark traditions for the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s. Graber's analysis, never published, but preserved in his personal papers at the University of Arkansas, suggests the Carver brothers had been engaged in activities far beyond the simple hunting and trapping for which they were known. According to Graber's notes, Elijah Carver had maintained correspondence with individuals in New Orleans, Boston, and even London, unusual connections for an isolated Ozark farmer. The letters contained discussions of ancient texts, obscure historical events, and what Elijah referred to as the old knowledge that had been deliberately obscured by those who fear its implications. More disturbing were the journal entries, which chronicled Elijah's growing obsession with what he called the patterns in human nature. Early entries showed a man with an unusual but not alarming interest in observing the behavior and characteristics of those he encountered. Over time, this interest evolved into something far more sinister. The subject responded as expected to the preparation, read one entry from 1899. The formula requires refinement, but the basic principle appears sound. Silas remained skeptical of the approach, but his traditional methods yield results too slowly for our purpose. What exactly this purpose entailed was never explicitly stated in the recovered documents, but the implications become clearer as one follows the progression of Elijah's writings. He became increasingly convinced that certain combinations of physical characteristics and behavioral traits marked individuals who possessed what he termed the ancient resonance. People who, in his disturbed worldview, were somehow more connected to some primordial power he sought to understand and harness. The disappearances began in the summer of 1899, according to newspaper archives from counties surrounding Shannon. First, a traveling salesman whose last known location was reported as heading toward the Jay's Fork area. Then, a young man from Salem who had set out to explore the Ozarks before beginning university studies in the fall. By 1902, at least 7 individuals had vanished in the region with no explanation. None of these disappearances were directly linked to the Carver brothers at the time. The Ozarks were and remain a challenging wilderness where the unprepared could easily become lost or injured beyond help. It was only in retrospect after the discoveries at the Carver homestead that authorities began to consider a connection. The true extent of the brothers' activities might have remained hidden forever, if not for an unusually persistent young journalist named Edward Markham, working for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Markham became intrigued by the case after reading Sheriff Holloway's minimalist report, which had been filed with state authorities and largely forgotten. In the summer of 1904, Markham traveled to Shannon County to investigate. His initial findings were published as a modest 3-part series titled Mystery in the Mountains. The articles detailed the abandoned homestead, the unexplained disappearance of the brothers, and the general atmosphere of unease that still surrounded the case more than a year later. What Markham could not have anticipated was the response his articles would generate. Letters began arriving at the Post-Dispatch office, some from individuals claiming to have encountered the Carver brothers in the months before their disappearance. Others from families of missing persons who wondered if their loved ones' fates might be connected to the mysterious case. Most significant was correspondence from a Dr. Wilson Leach of Springfield, who claimed to have met Elijah Carver at a medical conference in St. Louis in 1898. According to Leach, Carver had presented himself as a self-educated researcher interested in the physiological basis of human temperament. Though lacking formal training, Carver had impressed several attendees with his knowledge of anatomy and chemistry, knowledge that seemed incongruous with his background as a rural trapper. He spoke with remarkable precision about chemical compounds that might influence human behavior, Leach wrote. When questioned about his interest in such matters, he mentioned something about family traditions dating back to European ancestors who had practiced medicine in some capacity. This connection to European medical traditions would gain new significance when Markham, pursuing the story further, uncovered records indicating that Jeremiah Carver had not been born in America as locally believed, but had immigrated from a small village near the Black Forest region of Germany in 1849. Immigration records showed Jeremiah's original surname had been Kerber, later anglicized to Carver. This discovery led Markham to correspond with authorities in Bowdoin, Beavertonburg, seeking information about the Kerber family history. What he learned was disturbing. According to church records from the 1830s, the Kerbers had been a reclusive family rumored to practice unorthodox medical treatments. In 1847, local authorities had investigated the family after several villagers disappeared. The investigation was never completed. Jeremiah, then known as Joseph Kerber, fled the country with his young wife, arriving in America 2 years later. Markham published these findings in a follow-up article in December 1904, suggesting a disturbing possibility that whatever dark practices the Carver brothers had been engaged in might represent not an aberration, but the continuation of a family tradition spanning generations and continents. The implications of such a conclusion were too uncomfortable for many readers, and the Post-Dispatch received numerous letters, complaining about Markham's sensationalist reporting. The newspaper's editor, responding to the controversy, declined to publish further installments of Markham's investigation. Undeterred, Markham continued his research independently. In the spring of 1905, he returned to Shannon County, determined to locate individuals who might have had more substantial interactions with the Carver brothers prior to their disappearance. It was during this visit that Markham himself vanished. According to Sheriff Holloway's report dated May 12, 1905, Markham had been staying at a boarding house in Eminence while conducting interviews with local residents. He left early on May 8, telling the proprie he intended to visit someone who knew the Carvers well and expected to return by evening. When he failed to appear for 2 days, authorities were notified. A search party found Markham's horse tied to a tree approximately 3 miles from the abandoned Carver property. His notebook was discovered nearby, its final entry reading, "Only meeting Jay at the old mill site." Claims to know where they went. No trace of Markham himself was ever found. The identity of the mysterious Jay remains unknown to this day. Following Markham's disappearance, interest in the Carver case intensified briefly. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch sent another reporter accompanied by private detectives to investigate both the original mystery and their colleague's fate. Their findings, published in June of 1905, largely recapitulated what was already known with one significant addition: testimony from an elderly woman living near Current River who claimed to have seen 2 men resembling the Carvers boarding a steamboat bound for Memphis in March 1903. This potential sighting, never confirmed, suggested the possibility that the brothers had not met with foul play, but had deliberately fled the area. If true, the question remained: why leave their home so suddenly, abandoning possessions and creating the impression of a hasty departure in the middle of a meal? The mystery deepened further in 1907 when a hunter discovered a cave in a remote area approximately 6 miles from the Carver property. Inside were found items that Sheriff Holloway's successor, Thomas Garrett, identified as similar to those described in the sealed cellar room of the Carver house. The cave showed evidence of recent human habitation: ashes from fires, food remains, and makeshift furniture. Most disturbing was a collection of small wooden boxes, each containing what appeared to be human teeth and finger bones, wrapped in cloth-bearing initials. Investigators were able to match some of these initials to individuals reported missing between 1899 and 1903. This discovery renewed interest in locating the Carver brothers, with notices published in newspapers throughout the Mississippi River Valley. No confirmed sightings resulted, though dozens of reports flooded in from as far away as New Orleans and Chicago. Testament to how the story had captured the public imagination. The investigation officially remained open until 1912, when Sheriff Garrett, the last official directly involved with the original case, retired. His successor showed little interest in pursuing a cold case with no new evidence, and the file was effectively closed. The abandoned Carver homestead stood vacant until 1927, when it was purchased by the Peterson family. Their ownership proved brief and troubled. According to local accounts, the family experienced unsettling occurrences in the house: unexplained sounds, objects moving without apparent cause, and most disturbingly, the sensation of being watched while alone in the building. After less than 8 months, the Petersons abandoned the property, refusing to discuss their experiences in detail. Their hasty departure fueled local speculation that the house was tainted by whatever dark acts had transpired within its walls. The property changed hands several more times in subsequent decades, with no owner remaining longer than 2 years. By the 1950s, the house had fallen into disrepair, its roof partially collapsed, its windows broken, its doors hanging from rusted hinges. It was in this dilapidated condition that Dr. Samuel Winstead, a historian from the University of Arkansas specializing in Ozark folklore, first encountered the property in 1957. Winstead had become interested in the Carver case. While researching his book, Dark Corners, Forgotten Mysteries of the Ozarks, his investigation would uncover yet another layer to the already complex narrative. Through meticulous research in county records, church registries, and personal correspondence collected from descendants of Shannon County pioneers, Winstead constructed a more complete picture of Jeremiah Carver and his influence on his sons. According to Winstead's notes, published posthumously in the Journal of American Folklore in 1968, Jeremiah Carver had been more than simply a skilled woodsman. Multiple accounts described him as a healer sought out by locals for treatments when conventional medicine failed. His remedies, based largely on native plants and minerals found in the Ozarks, reportedly produced effects that some considered miraculous. More intriguingly, Winstead discovered references in several sources to a book that Jeremiah had brought with him from Germany, a text described variously as the Old Doctor's Book or Grandfather's Medicine. This book, presumably passed down to Elijah and Silas after their father's death, was never found among the items recovered from the homestead. Winstead theorized that this text might have contained knowledge from European folk medicine traditions, possibly augmented by Jeremiah's own discoveries during his years in the Ozarks. The combination, Winstead suggested, could have formed the basis for whatever experiments the brothers later conducted. But Winstead's most significant contribution to the Carver mystery came through his discovery of a collection of letters in the possession of Martha Holloway, Sheriff Holloway's granddaughter. These letters exchanged between the sheriff and state authorities in the months following the initial investigation revealed that certain details had been deliberately omitted from official reports. According to these letters, the personal effects found arranged in the cellar room included items that could be identified as belonging to at least 3 individuals known to have disappeared in the region. More disturbing were references to specimens, preserved in a manner suggesting medical study rather than mere collection. Sheriff Holloway had apparently chosen to withhold these details from public reports to prevent panic and to protect the reputation of Shannon County, which was already struggling economically and could ill afford the negative attention such revelations might bring. Winstead's research also uncovered a previously unknown connection between the Carvers and a German immigrant family named Schreiber, who had settled near Springfield in the 1850s. The Schreibers, like Jeremiah Carver, had come from the Black Forest region and were known locally as herbalists and healers. Correspondence between Elijah Carver and Willem Schreiber, dating from 1896 to 1901, suggested the two men shared an interest in what they referred to as the old ways and knowledge preserved from earlier times. Their letters frequently mentioned experiments with plant extracts and minerals believed to affect human knee physiology and perception. This connection to the Schreibers opened yet another avenue of investigation. Wilhelm's grandson, Hinrich Schreiber, still lived in Springfield in 1957 when Winstead contacted him. Though initially reluctant to discuss his family's connection to the Carvers, Heinrich eventually agreed to an interview. According to Winstead's notes from this interview, Heinrich described his grandfather and Elijah Carver as men obsessed with recovering lost knowledge. This lost knowledge, he explained, related to beliefs that certain combinations of naturally occurring substances could enhance human capabilities, strengthening the body, sharpening the mind, and even, according to some traditions, extending life. But their interest went beyond mere physical enhancement. Heinrich told Winstead they believed certain individuals possessed innate qualities that made them more receptive to these treatments. Qualities that could be identified through careful observation of physical characteristics and behaviors. This statement cast the Carvers' activities in a new and disturbing light. If they had indeed been seeking individuals with specific traits for their experiments, it would explain the seemingly random pattern of disappearances in the region, not random at all, but selective. Heinrich further revealed that his grandfather had abruptly ended his correspondence with Elijah in late 1901, apparently disturbed by the direction of the other man's research. In their final exchange, Wilhelm had written, "What you propose crosses boundaries that must not be transgressed. The ancients understood this, which is why such knowledge was deliberately obscured." Elijah's response, according to Heinrich, had been chilling in its calm dismissal of such concerns. Boundaries exist only in the minds of those who lack courage to transcend them. The ancients were not protecting us from knowledge, but protecting knowledge from those unworthy to receive it. Following this exchange, Wilhelm Schreiber had burned much of his correspondence with Carver, and according to family tradition, buried certain books and papers in a location he revealed to no one. Heinrich believed these materials remained hidden somewhere on the former Schreiber property, though he had never attempted to locate them. Winstead's investigation seemed poised to resolve many of the lingering questions surrounding the Carver case. He had scheduled a second interview with Heinrich Schreiber and planned to examine the former Schreiber property with the current owner's permission. He had also arranged to meet with descendants of two families whose members had disappeared during the period of the Carvers' activities. These meetings never took place. On October 12, 1957, Samuel Winstead's car was found abandoned on a rural road approximately 20 miles from Eminence. His research materials, notebooks, photographic copies of documents, and recorded interviews were missing. A single page torn from his notebook was discovered nearby, bearing a hastily scrolled message, being followed since Springfield. If reading this, tell Elizabeth I the message ended abruptly. Despite an extensive search involving state police and volunteers from 3 counties, no trace of Winstead was ever found. The disappearance of a respected academic reignited interest in the Carver mystery, resulting in a brief but intensive investigation by state authorities. This investigation yielded no new information about either Winstead's fate or the original case. The prevailing theory, never proven, was that Winstead had fallen victim to foul play related to ongoing criminal activities in the remote areas he had been exploring, perhaps stumbling upon a moonshine operation or some other illicit enterprise. Few gave credence to the possibility that his disappearance might be directly connected to the very mystery he had been researching, a case then more than 50 years old. Yet among locals in Shannon County, a different theory emerged that whatever dark legacy the Carvers had left behind had claimed another victim. In the years following Winstead's disappearance, the Carver homestead fell into complete ruin, eventually collapsing entirely by the mid-1960s. The land reverted to forest, with only the stone foundation remaining as evidence that a house had once stood there. Local residents generally avoided the area, and tales of strange sounds or unexplained phenomena associated with the site became common in regional folklore. The mystery might have been consigned to local legend and academic footnote, Had it not been for events that transpired in the summer of 1963, when construction began on a new road connecting Eminence to the newly established Ecoluf State Park. The planned route passed within a quarter-mile of the former Carver property. During preliminary work, a construction crew uncovered what appeared to be the entrance to a cave or tunnel not documented in any geological survey of the area. Initial exploration revealed a narrow passage extending horizontally into the hillside for approximately 30 ft before opening into a larger chamber. Within this chamber, workers discovered evidence of human habitation, ashes, discarded food containers, and crude furniture, all suggesting occupation sometime within the previous decade. More significantly, they found a metal box containing papers and bound journals. These materials were turned over to county authorities, who quickly realized their potential connection to the long, cold Carver case. The papers included letters dated as recently as 1958, addressed to someone identified only as nephew. The content suggested an ongoing continuation of whatever work the Carver brothers had begun decades earlier. References to the family tradition and our special knowledge appeared throughout, along with more disturbing mentions of suitable subjects and necessary sacrifices for advancement. The journals contained detailed observations of individuals in various Ozark communities with particular attention to physical characteristics, family histories, and behaviors. Entries from 1957 included references to the academic from Arkansas who was asking dangerous questions and getting too close to understanding. The final entry, dated November 3, 1962, read simply, "The signs indicate it is time to move again. The new location has been prepared. All will be transferred before winter sets in." This discovery prompted a renewed investigation led by Shannon County Sheriff Robert Tolman in cooperation with state police. A thorough search of the cave system revealed additional chambers extending deep into the hillside, some showing evidence of long-term habitation, others appearing to have been used for storage or other purposes not immediately apparent. In the deepest chamber, investigators discovered what Sheriff Tolman described. In his official report, only as evidence consistent with the accounts of what was found in the Carver cellar in 1903. He noted that this evidence had been carefully preserved and arranged in a manner suggesting ritual significance rather than mere practical use. The investigation expanded to include a search for recent disappearances that might be connected to the cave's occupant. Records from counties throughout southern Missouri and northern Arkansas revealed at least 11 individuals reported missing between 1953 and 1962. Many of whom had last been seen in areas near the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. None of these cases had previously been connected, as they occurred across different jurisdictions and involved victims of varying ages, genders, and backgrounds. The only common factor noted by one state investigator was that all had been described by family or friends as distinctive in appearance or manner, individuals who in one way or another stood out from the norm. The investigation also sought to determine the identity of the nephew addressed in the letters. Genealogical records showed that Elijah and Silas Carver had no known siblings or direct descendants. However, further research revealed that their mother, Sarah, had had a sister who married into the Henderson family of Reynolds County, Missouri. This connection led investigators to James Henderson, born in 1920, who had disappeared from his family's farm near Ellington in 1938 at the age of 18. According to his younger sister, interviewed in 1963, James had always been unusual, intensely curious, particularly about natural sciences, but also prone to dark moods and disturbing statements about the limitations of ordinary human existence. Most significantly, the sister recalled that in the months before his disappearance, James had mentioned receiving letters from relatives who understand me better than you do. relatives whose existence had been unknown to the rest of the family. This suggested a possibility too disturbing for many to contemplate: that the Carver brothers had not ended their activities in 1903, but had merely relocated them and had later recruited a young relation to continue their work. Work that had apparently continued in one form or another until at least 1962. Despite intensive searches throughout the Ozark region, no trace of James Henderson or any other individual connected to the cave dwelling was ever found. The investigation eventually stalled due to lack of new evidence, though it was never officially closed. The road construction project was rerouted to avoid the area entirely, and the cave entrance was sealed by order of the county commission. The official explanation cited safety concerns due to unstable geological conditions, but locals understood the true reason was fear of what might still lurk in those underground passages. In the decades since, the Carver case has remained a subject of fascination for historians, focusists, and enthusiasts of unsolved mysteries. Various theories have been proposed to explain the brothers' activities and ultimate fate. Some suggest they were merely practitioners of folk medicine whose treatments occasionally went awry, leading to deaths they concealed to avoid prosecution. Others propose they were early serial killers who used their isolation to conceal their crimes. Still others speculate they were genuinely pursuing some form of forbidden knowledge, whether related to medicine, psychology, or something more esoteric. The most comprehensive academic treatment of the case appeared in Dr. Margaret Hallowell's 1986 book, The Darkness in the Hollows: Murder and Mystery in the Ozarks. Hallowell, a criminologist with expertise in historical cases, analyzed all available evidence and concluded that the Carvers had likely been engaged in a form of pseudoscientific experimentation influenced by both European folk traditions and the scientific advances of the late 19th century. They occupied a unique historical moment, Hallowell wrote, when ancient beliefs about human potential were colliding with new scientific understandings of physiology and psychology. In their isolation, lacking formal education, but possessing fragments of old knowledge and new discoveries, they constructed their own disturbed paradigm, one that justified abduction and likely murder in the name of advancing their understanding. As for their disappearance and the evidence suggesting continued activity decades later, Hallowell proposed that the brothers had indeed fled in 1903, possibly maintaining their practices elsewhere before eventually returning to the region in a less conspicuous location. The nephew theory that they had recruited James Henderson to continue their work she found plausible but unproven. The last confirmed development in the case came in 1968, when a surveyor for the U.S. Forest Service discovered human remains in a remote area near Powder Mill Spring, approximately 20 minutes from the original Carver homestead. Forensic examination identified the remains as those of Edward Markham, the journalist who had vanished in 1905. The cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the remains, but the location far from where Markham had last been seen suggested his body had been deliberately transported to this isolated spot. More disturbing was the discovery that the remains had been arranged in a specific pattern with the skull separated and placed at what appeared to be the precise center of a circle formed by the other bones. No further human remains have been officially connected to the case, though local rumor holds that hikers and hunters occasionally stumble upon isolated graves or bone fragments in the more remote areas of Shannon County. Few such discoveries are reported to authorities due to both the difficulty of accessing these locations and the general reluctance to become involved in a story many locals prefer to forget. The land where the Carver homestead once stood remains uninhabited to this day. Acquired by the National Park Service as part of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways in 1971, it is unmarked on official maps and receives few visitors. Rangers assigned to the area acknowledge an unwritten policy of not directing tourists to the site, citing historical sensitivity and respect for local traditions. Those who do find their way to the overgrown foundation, stones, and collapsed cellar entrance often report a profound sense of unease, a feeling that despite the passage of more than a century, something of the Carver's presence lingers in that quiet forest clearing beside the Jack's Fork River. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is not what is known, but what remains hidden. The journals found in the cellar in 1903 and those discovered in the cave in 1963 have never been made fully available to the public or to independent researchers. They remain secured in state archives, accessible only to authorized officials. Similarly, the book that Jeremiah Carver reportedly brought from Germany, the text containing the old knowledge that may have formed the foundation of his son's later activities, has never been recovered. If it exists, it remains hidden, perhaps buried with other materials by Wilhelm Schreiber or concealed somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Ozarks. In 1978, a retired park ranger named Harold Larson, who had spent decades working in the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, published a short memoir titled A Life Among the Hills. In one chapter, he recounted an experience from 1973 that he had never officially reported. While on a routine patrol near Powder Mill Spring, Larson claimed to have encountered an elderly man sitting beside a small campfire in a clearing well off any established trail. The man, thin and weathered, but with remarkably intense eyes, invited Larson to share coffee and conversation. During their talk, which lasted several hours as evening fell, the old man displayed an encyclopedic knowledge of the region's geography, flora, and fauna. He spoke of locations and features that Larson, despite his long familiarity with the area, had never heard of. Most notably, he referred to certain caves and rock formations by names that appeared in no official records, but that Larson later discovered in 19th-century journals and letters. As darkness descended and Larson prepared to leave, the old man made a statement that would haunt the ranger for years to come. "You know," he said, "the Carbers weren't wrong about everything. Some people do have the potential to be more than human. They just misunderstood what that truly means." When Elson asked how the man knew about the Carvers, a subject rarely discussed openly in the Iam region, the old man simply smiled and said, "Family stories get passed down, Ranger, some more carefully than others." The next morning, Elson returned to the site with 2 colleagues, finding no trace of the man or his camp beyond cold ashes. A search of the surrounding area yielded nothing. Elson never reported the encounter officially, fearing ridicule, but in his memoir, he expressed his conviction that the man had been James Henderson, the nephew who would have been in his early 70s by that time. Whether Larson's encounter was real or merely a product of the Carver legend's hold on the regional imagination, it illustrates how deeply the case has embedded itself in Ozark folklore. Even today, more than a century after the brothers vanished, their name serves as a warning in local tradition. Don't be out too late in the deep hollows, parents tell children. That's when the Carvers went looking for special ones. In 2007, an anthropologist conducting oral history interviews in Shannon County noted that many residents still avoided certain areas after dark, particularly remote sections along Jack's Fork River. When asked why, older respondents often made reference to the old business with the Carver boys, or simply stated, "Some places aren't meant for people to go, especially alone." This persistent unease speaks to something beyond the mere facts of the case, to the way the Carvers seem to represent a particular type of horror deeply rooted in American consciousness. The fear of what might lurk in the wilderness beyond civilization's edge, of knowledge pursued without ethical constraint, of human potential twisted toward inhuman ends. The most recent chapter in the long, strange story of the Carver Brothers began in 2015, when flooding along Jack's Fork River eroded a section of bank near the site of the original homestead. The erosion exposed what appeared to be a small cave or storage chamber that had been sealed with stones and clay. Park Service employees investigating the opening discovered a metal box containing a single journal, its pages yellowed but largely intact. The journal, dated 1901 to 1902, was confirmed by experts to be in Elijah Carver's handwriting, matching samples from previously discovered documents. Unlike earlier journals which focused primarily on experiments and observations, this one contained more personal reflections. In it, Elijah expressed growing concern about his brother's mental state, describing Silas as increasingly erratic and speaking of voices only he can hear. More disturbing were Elijah's own ruminations on what he called the transformation, a process he believed would allow selected individuals to transcend ordinary human limitations. His writings suggested this transformation required not only specialized compounds derived from Ozark plants and minerals, but also proximity to certain geological features he termed confluence points, where underground water sources merged. The ancients understood the power of such confluences. He wrote in Woy Entry from December 1901, "Their sacred sites were not chosen by accident, but by careful observation of effects on human physiology and consciousness. We have located 7 such points in these mountains, each with its own distinct properties." The final entries from February 1903 indicated that Elijah had begun to fear that someone. He did not specify who had discovered the nature of their work and posed a threat to its continuation. He mentioned preparations for rapid departure if necessary, and the establishment of the alternative site where their research could continue undisturbed. The journal ended abruptly on February 24, 1903, with a single cryptic line: "He knows we leave, tonight." Park Service authorities turned the journal over to the FBI, which had taken an interest in the case due to its possible connection to historical disappearances. The FBI's analysis, completed in 2017, concluded that while the journal was authentic, its contents should be viewed with skepticism. The writings appear to reflect an individual suffering from what would now be diagnosed as delusional disorder with grandiose features. The report stated references to transformation and confluence points likely represent a personalized mythology developed to rationalize criminal behavior. Despite this dismissive assessment, the FBI did authorize ground-penetrating radar surveys at locations in Shannon County that matched Elijah's descriptions of confluence points. These surveys, conducted quietly to avoid publicity, reportedly identified unusual underground structures at 3 sites, structures that did not appear to be natural cave formations. The results of these surveys remain classified, though rumors among Park Service employees suggest at least one site was excavated under FBI supervision in 2018. What, if anything, was discovered has never been disclosed publicly. In 2019, a hiking trail in what is now the Ozark National Scenic Riverways was temporarily closed, following what official statements described as the discovery of historical artifacts. Requiring assessment by archaeological experts, the trail, which passed within a half-mile of one of the surveyed confluence points, reopened 3 months later with a slightly altered route that bypassed the area entirely. No explanation for the rerouting was provided, and Freedom of Information Act requests regarding the closure have been denied on grounds of ongoing investigation. These recent developments have reignited interest in the Carver case among researchers and enthusiasts of historical mysteries. Online forums dedicated to the subject have proliferated, with participants analyzing historical documents, sharing local legends, and occasionally reporting unusual experiences in remote areas of Shannon County. Professional historians and criminologists remain divided on the true nature of the Carvers' activities. Some maintain they were simply murderers whose crimes acquired a patina of mystery through decades of retelling and embellishment. Others argue that whatever their actual deeds, they represent an important case study in how isolation, unorthodox beliefs, and family tradition can combine to create patterns of behavior that defy conventional understanding. Dr. Rebecca Thornton, a historian specializing in American frontier medicine, published a paper in 2020 suggesting the Carvers may have been practicing a form of folk medicine with roots in the Schwarzwald, traditions of their ancestral Germany, traditions that sometimes included the use of human remains in the preparation of remedies. While this in no way excuses any crimes they may have committed, Thornton wrote, it provides a potential context for understanding their actions within their cultural and historical framework, rather than simply labeling them as inexplicable monsters. Others, like criminologist Dr. James Fairchild, maintain that the brothers fit the profile of early serial killers who developed an elaborate justification for their actions. The references to transformation and special knowledge serve the same psychological purpose as the delusions of more recent murderers who claim to be acting on divine instructions or preparing victims for an alien invasion. Fairchild argued in a 2018 interview, perhaps the most balanced assessment comes from folklorist Dr. Emily Garrison, whose 2022 book, Whispers in the Hollows, The Cultural Legacy of the Carver Case, examines how the story has evolved over time and what it reveals about Ozark regional identity. Whether or not all the reported events occurred exactly as described, Garrison writes, the Carver legend serves an important cultural function. It encapsulates fears about isolation, forbidden knowledge, and the darker potentials of human nature. It warns against both the dangers of venturing too far from community and the risks of bringing old, potentially harmful traditions into new contexts. For residents of Shannon County and surrounding areas, the Carver brothers remain more than historical figures or subjects of academic analysis. They persist as a living presence in regional consciousness, a cautionary tale, a source of morbid fascination, and a reminder that even in familiar landscapes, unknowable depths may lurk just beneath the surface. As one elderly resident told Dr. Garrison during her research, some folks say they're still out there, or at least their kind is. People who look at you like they're measuring you for something. People who know things nobody should know. Most likely it's just talk. But all the same, when I'm out in those deep hollows and the sun starts to set, I make sure I'm heading home. Some things are best left alone, and some places are best not visited after dark. The full truth of what transpired at that isolated homestead beside Jack's Fork River in the early years of the 20th century may never be known with certainty. The principals Elijah and Silas Carver, Edward Markham, Samuel Winstead, and possibly James Henderson have long since passed beyond the reach of human questioning. What remains are fragments, journals, letters, official reports, newspaper articles, oral traditions. From these fragments, generations have attempted to construct a coherent narrative to make sense of events that seem to defy easy explanation. Perhaps the enduring power of the Carver story lies precisely in this incompleteness, this resistance to definitive resolution. In the gaps between known facts, imagination finds space to explore the darker possibilities of human nature, and the unsettling question of what might hide in the spaces between what we know and what we fear to know. In the dense forests and deep valleys of the Ozarks, where sunlight filters green through ancient trees and silence can settle like a physical presence. The name Carver continues to evoke a particular quality of dread. Not the sudden shock of conventional horror, but the slow, creeping realization that behind the familiar facades of human existence, something entirely other might be watching, waiting, measuring each passerby against some incomprehensible standard. And in that realization lies perhaps the most disturbing possibility of all, that the Carvers' true legacy is not what they did, but what they represent. The potential within supposedly civilized humanity for pursuing knowledge and power beyond all ethical boundaries, for seeing in one's fellow humans not equals deserving of dignity and respect, but merely subjects for experimentation in service to some greater, darker purpose. As we approach the 120th anniversary of the Carvers' disappearance, their story serves as a reminder that some mysteries are perhaps best left unresolved, some questions best left unanswered, some paths through the wilderness best left unexplored. For those who venture into the remote hollows of Shannon County today, particularly as evening approaches and shadows lengthen beneath the ancient oaks, a certain awareness often descends, a prickling sensation at the back of the neck, a sudden attentiveness to small sounds, a reluctance to stray too far from established trails. Is it merely the power of suggestion, the mind's response to knowing the area's dark history? Or is it something more? Some lingering resonance of events that transpired long ago, but somehow continue to echo through the hills and valleys of this ancient landscape. Perhaps in the end, that uncertainty itself is the true horror of the Carver case. The possibility that some boundaries once crossed cannot be uncrossed. Some knowledge once gained cannot be forgotten. Some presences once invited cannot be banished. And so the story continues, passed from generation to generation, changing slightly with each telling, but maintaining its essential core of dread. A story of two brothers who looked at their fellow humans and saw not people, but potential, who pursued their obsessions beyond all limits of morality or mercy, and who may, if the whispered rumors are to be believed, have found in these ancient hills something that transformed them in ways that transcended ordinary human existence. Whether they achieved the transformation Elijah wrote of so obsessively remains unknown, but their story has certainly transformed the landscape they inhabited, overlaying its physical geography with a geography of fear that persists to this day, invisible to the eye, but palpable to anyone who knows the tale and ventures into those remote hollows as daylight fades. In the deepening twilight of the Ozark forest, where the boundaries between past and present, legend and reality seem somehow more permeable, their presence lingers, a cautionary tale, a persistent question, and a reminder that some hungers, once awakened, may never truly die.